You can do all the work in the world that's good for users, but if it's not in the ranking signals, you're not going to get a reward for it. How in the world has this site been up 10 years with this issue and not had a problem? And Google just didn't devalue it, now decided they will. So maybe it's the area you're in, maybe it's the type of publication you have, maybe you're doing informational blog content, they don't care that much, suddenly they do. I don't know the reasons. That does happen. So don't think, oh, it's been on my site forever, it couldn't have hurt me. Actually, yeah, it could. If you want to learn how to audit websites, if you want to learn about things that do affect your site's ranking values, you definitely want to go in and get a copy.
In today's episode, we're joined by Kristine Schachinger. Kristine has over 20 years of digital experience, including focus on website design and implementation, accessibility standards, and all aspects of website visibility involving SEO, social media, and strategic planning. She additionally specializes in site health auditing, site forensics, technical SEO, and site recovery planning, especially when involving Google algorithms such as the helpful content and core updates. Her years of experience in design and development, and even more years in online marketing, give her a depth and a breadth of understanding that comes from a broad exposure to not only digital marketing, but the complete product lifecycle, along with the underlying technology and the lifecycle processes. She is a well-known international speaker and author who can be found on LinkedIn and every week on Webcology as a co-host with Jim Henger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Digital Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Eli Adams. Today's episode is brought to you by FireUsMarketing.com, where SEO solutions pave the way to digital excellence. Welcome to the show, Kristine.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm very excited to have you on the show today. I remember when we did our little intro call and talking with you. I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and you're always not only like just posting your own stuff on LinkedIn that's really valuable, but I love the insights when you comment on other people in the SEO industry. You obviously have a lot of experience, and sometimes you have a different take on, whether things are good or bad, or like one, for example, I saw the other day, you commented on ChatGPT's search and whether that's going to affect SEOs or not affect SEOs. And so I can tell that you have a lot of knowledge around SEO, and being a part of this SEO series, I'm really excited about the topic we're going to go over today, which is SEO and search engine algorithms. I think that SEOs understand search engine algorithms at a high level. I think they understand they exist, but I don't think there are many people, especially junior SEOs, that really understand it at a deep level like you do. So I'm excited to dive into that. But before we get into the technical side, let's learn a little bit about you.
So I originally was from New York. My mom was a dancer at the Copacabana way back in the day for someone by the name of Jimmy Durante. Most people who are younger probably don't know who that is, but just think of the Rat Pack plus one. And My dad was from the Bronx. My mom was from Bronx still. And my dad's dad, who I never actually met, came here as a war refugee from also Hungary back in the day. So they were going to conscript him into the military after they were invaded by, all I know is, the communists. That's what my grandmother said. And he came here. He didn't speak the language. He learned from TV. Married my grandmother, and that's how my dad's side of the family started here. So, and then we moved from there to a place called Fairview, Pennsylvania, which is near Erie. And so I grew up on the lake there, which was wonderful. I was a little tomboy, go out there with my bare feet as soon as I could, and hike down to the pond nearby or the lake. So it was really good bringing up. It was a company called Amsco my dad worked for. So it was a company like town, like everyone worked for the company in the area he worked in. So it was before they had like planned communities, we had a lot of planned events and stuff. So it was very good. And then we moved to Fairfax, Virginia. So I was in Fairfax, Virginia, where I went from the high being like 85 to the high being like 100 with 90% humidity. We moved in the middle of summer. Yeah. So I spent most of my life in Virginia. Went to school, college in North Carolina. Went to a private school in Maryland my last year of high school called Sandy Spring Friends. It was a Quaker school. So it was quite a different education, which was really positive. Yeah. They're very big on the teachers and the students being like co-creators in the education. That was great. Nice. And then I moved to Las Vegas 20 years ago this month.
So at what point did you get into the digital world?
So I graduated with a degree in art and sociology, which means I was a barista. Because there's not a master's or a PhD. There's no job for a sociologist or an art major. But I was going on another yet pointless interview for a job I was not qualified for, nor did I really want. and saw an ad in the paper for someone who could do HTML and web design. What are those? I didn't know, this is still early in the day. And I looked at HTML code. I go, and I'm really dating myself here. That looks like WordPerfect code. And I think I could do that. Do you remember WordPerfect at all?
I do. Yep. The whole blue screen.
And then you had to write the code at the bottom to do like paragraphs and bullet. So I worked for a small mom and pop firm. And then after a year, I moved into I lived in Winchester, Virginia, which is where my family had a country store for a number of years. And it was 70 miles outside DC. And we worked for a publisher that had like publications. So they automatically were given the work for the websites. But we weren't often allowed to tell people we worked on those websites. So when Martha Stewart did her IPO, my firm in Winchester, Virginia did the IPO, servers, everything. Oh, wow. We were not allowed to tell anybody we worked on Martha Stewart stuff. So we couldn't claim it. We couldn't put it anywhere because it wasn't New York. And back then, New York was where you did that. And it was in Winchester, Virginia with a population of 80,000. So, and my claim to fame back then was I got to do Reba McEntire's website. My design won over like 5 other designs. If you saw it today, you'd like, that's the winning design. But back then, that's the winning design. And and then I did front-end dev. And of course, back then, devs didn't allow us to call ourselves devs. We weren't devs. We were just front-end people. And I worked in the middle between the back-end devs, the content people, and other designers. And I would put everything together, do all the QA and testing. Back then, you didn't have QA testers. QA testing, and then roll it out. So when we rolled out Reba McEntire's site, I was there 72 hours. I worked trying to get that rolled out.
Yeah.
And then .com bust and 9/11 happened. There were no jobs. I wound up commuting 3 hours each way into DC for work because it was the only job that was available. And soon after that, worked at AOL and was a contractor, and then worked at AOL as an employee for a year. Then worked locally in Winchester, and then came out here to go back to school to get my PhD, which I did full-time work. And then we got to my dissertation stage, so I did all the schooling, and they were cutting money, and they had to graduate so many people. And they said, you either have to do full-time school or full-time work. So your dissertation needs to be finished by X date. And I said, well, I'm only me. I can't do full-time school on top of what I'm already doing.
Yeah.
So I never got the PhD. So that's my sad tale. But I was also doing this work at the same time. So, because that was 2000, I think that was 2011, 2012 when I finished that.
So a lot has changed since the WordPerfect days.
Yeah, yes. And when we had one undo with a Photoshop, an undo. So you flatten it because you had to flatten the image. And then if you didn't undo it and save it, then you lost all your layers. All go away because you couldn't undo it after you flattened and saved. That was 2. Yeah, we learned that the hard way. Yeah, and sites had to be 250K, the entire page, the images, the scripts, everything had to be 250. Yeah.
So I mean, you have a strong background in coding and development and design. Sort of sounds like that combination, which probably helped a lot when getting into the SEO world, and that's probably why you're more technical than most people. How did you get into the SEO world? What was that like?
So interesting enough, I moved to Vegas. I was working on a government contract back east, and that ended. So I got a job locally at something called Travel Worm. Back then, and even until only I think about 10 years ago, all reservations in Vegas had to be made by fax through three companies that had the ability to make reservations. So we were one of those companies. So, which is amazing, right? You don't think about that. Like in 2008, you were booking a hotel in Vegas. It was going through a fax machine. Through a local company, even on Orbitz, Travelocity, Expedia, all those. They had to go through these 3 companies. I worked for one. So I was working there as a front-end dev designer, was creating like microsites for travel and things like that. And I noticed we were spending $4 million a year on Google clicks, which is a lot for a small company. Yeah. And so I was studying up on this SEO thing because I was kind of bored. I've been doing, hand coding HTML for a few years now, and JavaScript and all that. And so So I go to my boss and I say, I'm learning this SEO thing. I'd really like to take it over if I could, save us some money, and I could learn something new. And she's like, well, we have this new website that we launched that is still not indexed, like 4 months ago. And she goes, or 5 months ago, something like that. And she says, so if you can figure out why it's not indexed, we will give you the work. Because they're paying $20,000 a month right now. And they keep telling us it's a sandbox. And I'm like, well, I read about that sandbox. I don't think it's a sandbox. So I'll take a look. Nowadays, I know in 5 minutes what to look for. It took me a day. But I'll let you guess. You want to guess what the problem was?
Robots.txt.
There's no index on the site. Yeah.
I knew it.
Yeah. So I went to
Oh
my
my
boss.
God.
I'm like, we just lift this little tag. We should be fine. So
Yeah.
she added that to my list of things to learn. And so I cut my teeth on Vegas hotels, which is a pretty competitive kind of area.
Yeah.
And she was the first one who sent me to a conference, my first conference. There was a PubCon conference, but I can't remember if that was first locally, but I went to like SES in San Jose and one in New York. And I was just so enthralled with the industry, like all these cool people from all these different backgrounds,
Yeah.
like, and they have fun parties and everyone's social. Like, it was like, I've always been a geek, but a little bit of a social geek. So I didn't always sit in the geek world. But SEOs are like social geeks. So it was like, hey, I found my tribe finally.
I loved those. You know, we went to PubCon. I took my team to PubCon in Vegas. We went to Seattle. We went to Florida. We did lots of different MozCon, PubCon, all sorts of different conferences like that. And you're right, it was fun. Like, you would get there and the vendors would find you and take you out to their, you know, their parties at night and pay for your dinner, and you just felt special. And I miss those days. Yeah.
It's definitely worth it. It's definitely fun. So
That's awesome.
so I did so that, and another skill I have is accessibility, and I was also director of technology for a startup and did all that. Recoded the front end pages, the superpages.com back around 2009. And then my boss, I was working like 100 hours a week at the startup, and he went from being a really nice guy to not being a really nice guy because he was staying awake all the time. And one day I was just kind of had it, and I asked my mentor, should I quit? And he said, I can't, you know, I can't tell you to quit. I said, you're not telling me what to do. I just want to know what you do. And I already lined up the superpages.com job. And it was the most money I ever made in my life per hour. 100. They told me to, like, when I bid 80 an hour. And they're like, no, they will not hire you at 80 an hour. And I'm like, oh, that's like the going rate, right? And they go, no, it's too low. You bid like 175. And I was like, 175? Like, I'm making like 60,000 a year. 175, right?
Yeah.
So I bid 130. We got me down to 135. But so I had 6 months of work set up. And so I quit that day, and I did Super Pages. I did loved web design. I did a lot of that. But over the years, WordPress took over people doing coding websites. And doing design work outside of a company is really difficult. The last big design job I did, I said, please don't take it to your board. We'll never get out of design. He took it to his 13-person board. 8 months later, they canceled the project. Really hard to do to make money if you are stuck in projects that take months and months and months to finish. So I started concentrating primarily on accessibility and SEO as my primary. I still build websites. I still build WordPress, but that's not my primary offering. And during that time, though, also I was a lead accessibility person for the federal government on a site called USA.gov, while I was also doing my SEO projects. I'm a big believer in, I know people don't do this now, but not being a specialist in some areas, like really knowing some areas really, really well, but also having other skills, because having gone through the .com crash, I found out really quickly, if you only have 1 or 2 skills and those jobs are all gone, then you have no work.
Yeah.
So I try to keep up a skill set that's kind of broad. So then I primarily just kept switching over more and more to SEO, and that's primarily what I do now. So 90% of my work is SEO.
So what part about what you do excites you the most? When you wake up in the morning, you're like, I can't wait to go do this. What's that for you?
2 things. One, I really like being able to help clients. Like right now, there's a core update running through. It's going slowly, but I'm seeing spikes, seeing the hockey stick that all of us live for. You know what I mean, right? You wake up, you see that hockey stick, and you're like, oh, yay, right? So that kind of stuff where I'm figuring out the problems that the website has, testing whether the update is going to reward it, and getting that reward is huge for me. Also, just learning. I get bored really easily. So I know a lot of people in our industry are really smart people, and they're probably the same way. So it changes all the time. So there's always something new to learn, to go a deep dive into. Like, I never thought I would learn what large language models are and how those operate, and sit and talk to Black Hat from NVIDIA, listening to, but now I do. And now I'm probably also going to learn Python. And like you, probably I've taught myself most everything myself. There weren't classes for it. There weren't
Yep.
Like there were JavaScript or HTML classes, but who had time for that? I had
Yeah.
to learn on the job. So yeah.
Yeah, there's so many resources these days. So a lot of the people getting into the industry, I don't think they really know what they have. Like I remember WordPress in the beginning. I remember building my first WordPress website like 15 years ago, and having to mess with the database, and I used FileZilla, and it's not like a point and click
No.
and you're done like it is now.
No.
A lot has changed since then. It's fun to kind of reminisce about how things used to be and how they are now. And as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about like my oldest was born in 2007, and I'm like, wow, she was still here when people were faxing Vegas hotels.
Yeah.
And obviously she doesn't remember it, but she's 12, like that. She's turned 13. That doesn't seem like that long ago.
No.
That faxes were still a big thing.
When my roommate who moved here with me from Virginia got a job at MGM down on the Fremont Experience, where they have the big, overhead thing.
Yep.
He texted me and he goes, "You will not believe where I am," because he was supposed to manage the server. And I go, where are you? He's like, "My closet." I said, "The closet with what?" Okay, we came from DC area. DC was the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. So when I moved to Vegas and he moved to Vegas, we were just shocked. Like, what do you mean a closet? He goes, "The server, not servers, the server is in a closet." And I go, "Does the closet have air?" "Not really." "And it has a fire sprinkler." It's like, what?
Yeah.
He goes, "And there's no backup of the $1 million program that they use to run."
Wow.
And they go, "Now
for Fremont
Street." He goes, "There's no backup. There's no second server. It's in a closet, and there's a fire sprinkler in here, and the AC doesn't really work, so it's about 100 degrees." Like,
oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So they were still doing them by text when I got here.
Yeah.
And
well, hopefully they're more updated nowadays, though, right?
just recently, like I said, just recently though, they just came off those faxes. I think it was in the last 10 years. So yeah, they're still faxing all those 50 million people a year that came here, all booked by that.
Well, Kristine, let's jump into some of the technical stuff for our conversation today.
Sure.
So at a high level, so if I'm a business owner or an up and coming, SEO, and I'm listening to this podcast and I hear you talking about algorithms, can you at a high level explain what an algorithm is and why it's important for people to know when considering SEO?
Sure. So algorithms are the way that Google basically scores and ranks your site. And there's this big controversy over EAT. Now, of course, Google has put it in their documentation finally that EAT has nothing to do with ranking signals, right? But a lot of people are spending all their time in doing EAT things like having author bios. So I was at Ungagged. I don't know if you remember that conference, great conference. And two doctors came up to me who knew each other, and each had spent $40,000 on rewriting all their content. And I was like, why would you do that? And they go, because we were told by an SEO that we had to have medical authors. And I said, but did you oversee the content? Was it good content? They're like, yeah, it was good quality content. We oversaw it all, but we needed author names. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I said, Google doesn't care about your author names and bios. And they go, is that why we got no result from the $40,000 we spent? And I go, yeah, unfortunately, that's the reason. And recently, I had a site come to me, and they had been down for 8 months. And they've been down for 8 months from an update, poor update, which actually tends to be technical. Not always, but tends to be. And the person had them do EAT stuff. EAT's not in the ranking signals. It's not in the algorithms. Now, you may hit on something by accident, but they had them do EAT stuff. So they were down 8 months, almost out of business. And it's not the SEO's fault. It's not that they just didn't know that the people that were promoting it, weren't aware how the algorithms work, and the algorithms were not doing anything with EAT. Now, aligning with EAT with ranking signals, that's different. But most people were just following what was in the guidebook, and that wasn't helping the website. So I think it's really important people understand it. And there's this great set of documents that Google has called ranking system documentation, and most people have never heard of it. And they don't tell you everything, but they tell you a lot of what you need to know about how the ranking systems work, what makes up a ranking system. Like CWVs are part of the page experience ranking system. What is a ranking signal? What is a ranking factor? What is a ranking system? So I think it's really important that people understand how is Google scoring and ranking your pages, because you can do all the work in the world that's good for users. I hate when Google says that. But if it's not in the ranking signals, you're not going to get a reward for it. You're not going to get any growth from it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hate when Google says that because like, all you have to do is good for users. And it's like, you can do many things that are good for users, but you will not reward because you do not evaluate it. And if Google doesn't evaluate it with the algorithms, then they won't reward it.
Do you think that SEOs focus on EAT just because Google's talked about it so much? Like it seems like besides looking at Google documentation, EAT seems to be a pretty important topic in the SEO world. Is it just a miscommunication? Are they just looking in the wrong areas?
Well, Google never said to concentrate on EAT. In fact, the things that people picked out of the guideline, Google said don't work, like since 2018. They told people not to concentrate on author. Now, if you're a news site, you need to have authors and bios, but just because Google wants to know you have an author and a bio, not because they were evaluating. And I even saw documents where people wrote like about they were using like 10 different systems. Most of them were outdated or defunct. And they were getting an author like ID print out of it. And then they would, I just tell people, whenever you think about something and you think it's a ranking signal, ask yourself, is this something that would apply equally to every document in the world? We're talking billions of trillions if they crawl, but billions that they have in the index. Could they apply it quickly, and could it be done in the instant you do a search? And if you're talking about authors, every document has an author, right? Even sometimes Google would say it's a website, but if it has the authors change their name, authors write about different things, authors use pseudonyms, authors sometimes don't have their name on something. Why would Google spend that many resources on something that really doesn't offer them anything? Because I could get my buddy, it's not really my buddy, but let's just say Neil deGrasse Tyson was my buddy, and I have him write on my blog, right? How does Google know if that's real or not? There was a $6 billion fake science industry that someone did a presentation on DEF CON a few years back, and you can look it up. They had fake doctors with fake universities, with fake degrees, with fake publications, getting their fake information into real publications in the non-peer reviewed section. And if Google can't tell that, how is Google going to be able to tell every author, right? So it never made sense. Never made sense, except authorship under G+. But authorship under G+, you and the publisher said you were a writer for that publication. And at the time, most people don't know, and we'll get into all the details. I did a bunch of reporting and writing on it at the time. Google was developing an identity system. So there's a big movement across the world to get rid of passwords. And they were going to do it by giving you someone who maintained your identity. And when you went to a website, if it's like, you have to be over 18, it would tell that website you were over 18. You didn't type anything in. It just did all it for you. Problem is there's no oversight on those identity providers, so they could do whatever they want with the data. The first three were official, by the White House recognized, Google, Equifax, and PayPal. Twitter was trying to become, Facebook was trying to become one. Then the Snowden stuff came out, and suddenly the program was defunded, and within a year or two, Google Plus was now just a social network. But if you remember, everybody had to have a G Plus account. And that was because that was going to be your identity account. And they were keeping lots of data on you. If you used it back then, like they knew all your Twitter connections. You could go to Twitter and they showed when you joined up with someone and who you knew and stuff like that, right? So that's where authorship came from. But that died when G Plus died as an identity project, which died when the federal government stopped funding it and the governments around the world stopped funding it. So the funny thing is the big meeting that Google had in the UK about it with UK leaders and EU leaders was in the George Orwell room at Google, which is just, I think, a funny little tidbit. So that's where authorship came from. So, but it's not a thing now. It wasn't a thing recently. The raters guidelines are for raters. It's like I have an engine on a NASCAR, right? And engineers change it, and they put it on the track, and they put a bunch of people out there that have like radar guns and watch how it goes and does it take the turn rights and all that, and they put that data back to the engineers. They don't know anything about the engine. They don't know how it works. They're not engineers. They're just telling them the data that shows them what was the result. And that's all the Rater's Guide was doing, was showing the raters how to qualify what is the result of the test that Google is running. So unfortunately, a lot of people took that to mean these things in this guide are all ranking signals. And Google said for years that they weren't, but they just weren't adamant enough. And there's too many people in the industry saying every little detail in there was related to ranking signals. So I don't think it was anyone's fault, except maybe Google. Google could have been a lot more adamant. Now they're adamant. You can look it up in the documentation. It says not related to ranking signals or something like that.
correct me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion, the algorithms are there kind of for two different reasons. One is they want to deliver the best results for what the data shows, for what people are looking for, right? So they're putting all of these pieces together and saying, if I search X, Y, and Z, my intent is to find this, right? And so the algorithms help with that. They also help to block out, the second piece is they also help to block out spam. There's a lot of people trying to manipulate the search engines. There's a lot of people trying to scam other people. And so those algorithms also protect you as a user, ensuring that you're not going to get some website that was built yesterday that looks official, that, just like you were saying, the fake scientists putting out their own stuff. So is that a correct assumption?
The reasons for them, yeah, definitely. So Google's product isn't Google's search results. It's what it brings back with the search results, right? So if I brought back like terrible websites or websites that are irrelevant, like lately, then Google would be perceived as not a good service, right? And back in the day, Matt Cutts, actually, if people who remember, Matt Cutts was a big part of the industry for many years. Matt Cutts wrote one of the big algorithms that got rid of the PPC of spam back then, which was porn, pharmaceuticals, and casinos. So back then, I don't know if you remember, but if you went to a search engine like Yahoo, you were inundated with those. We also know plenty of friends who made a lot of money off of the affiliates or the. So Google had to do something to make it so when you and I search for stuff, we weren't being inundated with the spam. And the spam was very targeted back then. Now it can be everything from politics to, selling downloads or something. But so the algorithms were written to try to get rid of the spammy results in there. And basically all it originally was spam. Google's original webmaster guidelines were about spam. It's not that way anymore. Now there's user experience. Now there's, how fast does it load? It's not just user experience, but also, how much resources it's taking. So there's so many things more now, usability and all that. But at the time, it was just, that's where it came from, was that. Yeah. And to make sure that you get the best result. Yeah.
So if you were to rank maybe the top, I don't know, 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 things that are ranking factors in the algorithm, what would you say are like the most important?
Ooh, that's hard because we don't really know. But I will say I will generalize the categories. Technical is the most important. Not because technical is more important than anything else, but because if your technical is not good, then Google will not or cannot properly crawl and index your content. So you could have the most amazing content in the world and you'll either get not as many visitors as you could, or you're not getting any at all. So technical is the most important. And people say things that don't do technical, like if I only do an audit when it's like over 1,000 pages. And I'm like, I did a 5-page site and they had 20 errors, major errors in that site because how it's built. That had they continued to grow, which is what they were going to do, they would have taken those errors and just expanded them to every page on the site, right? Also, I hear things like, oh, it's just not that important. And it's like the most common thing I see that's deadly serious to a website is the head tag, the opening head and closing head tags. If there is a script in there or an HTML tag that's not supposed to be there, Google will immediately, or all search engines, will close the head tag at that tag and doesn't read the rest, jumps to the body. They assume you made a mistake. You should have opened the body here, right? The body is where the content goes. So if my CSS, my JavaScript, my everything related to that site are past that mark, well, now it doesn't see any of that. And if Google can't see your CSS and JavaScript, they will not rank you. They will drop you out of the index. Yeah. So that's often caused by Facebook pixels or Google pixels. You put it in there and it writes a script, and that script has HTML in it or no script tags that Google doesn't like, and they end it. And then I saw a site lose 90% of their traffic. They're only a 180-page site. A lot of people who don't do technical are like, we don't need to even audit that. We do. There was no update at the time. They lost 90% of their traffic, and they lost it because a Facebook pixel was put too high in the head, cut off their head information. No CSS, no JavaScript. Google couldn't see it. We fixed it. 5 weeks later, they were back with all the traffic.
And when you fix it, do you just lower it? Like, how do you fix it?
You can just lower it to right above the closing head tag, because that's what it's going to do anyways, is close the head. Or try to see if you can move it into the page. So that's the most important. Content is usually massively important, but how you do the content. So Google has an algorithm now at the very end of the process that does the final sort called neural matching. And neural matching only does intent and document text. That's it. So if you don't have entities in there that Google matches to the intent, then Google may or may not give you that visibility, right? So content is really important, but doing content the right way, also making sure you have your internal linking, which Google's put a lot of emphasis on lately, that you have it segmented and H tags, things like that. Each single thing may not be that important, but together holistically, it makes up a very important product. Also, making sure that you specify. So originally Google, and I don't know if this is a myth, but this is what I was told, when the engineers, when Paige and Bryn went into do this originally, right? Their paper that they wrote, they got them all the money to create Google, originally called Backrobe, which is just weird. They went into a library to do research, and they said, wait, we don't need to reinvent how to organize information online. We already do it. It's called a library. And if you remember a card catalog is your search result. Title, description, number, right? Your Dewey Decimal number is your URL. URL takes you to a book. A book has a clear table of contents. That's your navigation. And then it breaks down by topics and segments inside of topics, right? If it's written well. You don't just get a book that's like, here's all our text. We have no chapters, right? We have no subchapters. So a lot of times on a website, people go, we're just going to put all this information on one page. And that would be like if I went to a book and it said coffee, and then everything about coffee in the world and everything that you wanted to sell, and everything was on one page, right? And that happens often. But Google's looking for specificity and clarity of information of that content. So content is super important. Intent is super important. Entities are super important. But also how you construct that content inside your site architecture is equally as important. And then how you link that content together.
How do you go about starting an audit to find all of this? Are there specific tools that you'd recommend people use, or do you just have to have the experience like you have to dive in and look at each of these areas?
It depends on what kind of audit you're doing. So content audits I do separately from site health and technical. So I may look at the content and say you have general issues, but site content audits should be separate because they're very in-depth and they're going to take a lot of your time. But for the type of audit I do two main tools. I have Sitebulb and Screaming Frog. They both look at the sites a bit differently. So you get more information by using both. Also, like to get information about one is a little easier from Screaming Frog, and the next one is a little easier from Sitebulb. Sitebulb is a great tool if you're trying to learn, because for everything that Sitebulb pulls back, they have a little learn more, and that learn more takes you to a page, and it tells you why they found it, how they found it, what the problem is, and here's reading about that issue. So if you want to learn how to audit websites, or you want to learn about things that do affect your site's ranking values, you definitely want to go in and get a copy of Sitebulb. You can do free. You don't have to do paid, but it's really cheap. I think it's like $35 or $40 a month. And Screaming Frog is like my down and dirty tool. And they have a lot of cool, neat things now they're doing. Like they'll show you n-grams, which are like, the word constructs that find on a page. There's ways to add ChatGPT to it. So they've got a lot of neat things. But also they give you like this nice little list of issues, and you can just go down that little list. They also do a 3D fly-through mapping of your website, which is very cool, of how the crawler found everything. So I'll pull it up to a client and it's blood red, right? Because that means everything was a stop point, a redirect, a 404, a 500 error, canonicalization, something. Not all of those are bad, but the site should have a lot of green because that means the crawler can get through the site. Pulled up one for a client yesterday. It's like one green and like a whole stem of red, right? So it's very easy to show a client. Google cannot easily crawl and index your site because look at all the red here. So it's a great tool. And then Sitebulb has a real ability to go really deep. And they give you lists, and then you can regex, and you can really go deep into the data that you need from them. So they're both great tools. They're both inexpensive. I don't really, other tools I use what clients have, like I have a keyword tool I have access to. I don't really use SEMrush unless the client needs it. Not that it's bad or anything. It's just there's not a lot of use for it in auditing. I'm not going to use their audit tool. I need to audit by collecting all the data from those NGSC to see where things are. And then there's a couple new tools that you can use on GSC to make it almost like a GA, which is fantastic. I don't want to say, one's called SEO Stack, and I can't remember the name of the other one, unfortunately. But they are two awesome tools because they will show you where content is decaying, where you lost traffic. Like they take GSC and they make it very powerful, and they're also very inexpensive. So those are the three that I use of GSE and the 2 crawlers.
Okay.
Just because
Yeah.
I don't need a lot of information outside of that for a site audit. For strategy, I might need more. I do also have Majestic hooked up because for Sitebulb and Screaming Frog, you can have APIs. So I do the PageSpeed API, which is free from Google, and then I do also the Majestic for link values. Sitebulb does real testing, live testing on the pages. Screaming Frog does lighthouse testing. So there are 2 different ways to look at your page speed and download.
I've used both in the past. I think Sitebulb is a lot more visual.
I forgot to mention that. Great graphs for clients. Awesome screenshot. Put it in your report.
Yeah, amazing. So if you're brand new to the industry, or just you're a business owner or whatever, and you kind of want to like dig in a little bit and get some idea where you're at technically, Sitebulb is way easier to use for a beginner.
It is way easier.
Screaming Frog has some good stuff, but it's very technical. Even the user interface, I mean, it hasn't changed in like 10 years. It's a little bit more technical. You export the data and look through it more so than Sitebulb being visual.
That's true. Sitebulb does this too, but I think they just now have a general export, but they didn't before. You had to go page level. You can do a screenshot of every page on the website. So I do that on every single site I crawl on there. You know what I found last week?
What's that?
The crawler was adding things to the cart because instead of using buttons, in the HTML, they use links. So the crawler could add products to the cart. One of the carts was $350,000 a product, average $40 cost. So they had it.
Oh my gosh.
So the crawler, Google's crawler was getting that too, right? They were getting to add all these links on every product, every variation, everything to the cart. And then it was running back through things. So it just kept adding to the cart. So the screenshots are really invaluable because you can see. Also, when you get reports on like this page uses JavaScript content, this says JavaScript link, it's really hard to go page by page and figure out what's happening there. Like, is content invisible to Google or not? But when you use the screenshots, you can look through all the screenshots. And one time, I had a site where 900 pages of their blog were all blank. And I couldn't figure out why. Not the normal reasons. It wasn't JavaScript, wasn't any of that. I was looking through Chrome developer tools, and I just happened to put my head down, and there was a JavaScript error and something called console messaging, which is what programmers use to like find errors in their code. And it had an error, and it was looping. So it's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 90,000, 100,000 of that until the browser would just drop it. Now, you and me, we couldn't see that. But the crawler timed out waiting for it to do that. The only way I ever would have found that was screenshots.
And that Sitebulb is the one that does that, right?
That one was Screaming Frog. They both do it, but Screaming Frog has the ability to bulk export all your screenshots. Yeah. So I just export the whole thing when I give it to a client.
Which one did you say does the content decay analysis?
Oh, SEO Stack, and there's another one too. And I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of it. I wish I could because it's a very good tool. It's similar though. They go into GSC and they make GSC a powerful data analytics without having to learn like a big query and paying $15 a month to like Google.
So back to the algorithms. There's every single day there's adjustments in the algorithm, and then every once in a while there's a big one, right? And you mentioned the core update. There's obviously back in the day the biggest ones that happened in the back in the day that hurt most people were like Panda, Penguin, stuff like that, right? Let's talk about like the core update so that people get a better understanding of like every once in a while there's this big one. So what is the core update? How do people find out about it? Where do they learn about it? How do they analyze their site to say, was I hit or was I not hit? Let's talk through that a little bit.
Sure. Google actually put up a nice document about this where they show you the differences in traffic loss based on an update versus a decay, that kind of thing. And it's nice because as an auditor, I know these just by looking at them, but most people don't. An update is generally going to destroy large amounts of your traffic. It's going to be 50%, 60%, 80%, 90%. If you lost 10% during an update, that's not from the update. You lost 20% during the update, it's not from the update. It's from, because Google devalues, they're like, oh, we don't like what you did. We're going to make it hurt. Right now, I have an argument now. They don't need to make it hurt like they used to because these aren't people spamming in Google. These are people that like had a Facebook pixel in the head tag and didn't know it, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. So the core update is all the ranking signals that Google calls as core ranking signals. And any one of those can be updated. They all could be updated, but they always have like a major effect. Now, I don't know this one yet because we have 2 to 3 more weeks of it rolling out. But generally, it's applied at the keyword level because Google they originally only applied to your money, your life sites. And that could be anything that just does credit cards transactions, right? Because you're doing data. But they don't know what your money or your life site. Gary said this one day. He said, we don't know what your money or your life site is. They do know what your money or your life queries are. So they were doing it at the keyword level. So one of the first ones I identified, I went in and found at the folder level, they had 2 sets of folders that completely dropped. Everything else was good, just those 2 folders. And inside those 2 folders was the bulk of their content. And then we found out that they had large technical issues. Now, the interesting thing about the technical issues is they tend to have been on the site a very long time. And Google didn't devalue you for it. And then they come with a core update and they're like, smack. And you're like, what? I look at these sites and I'm like, how in the world has this site been up 10 years with this issue and not had a problem? And Google just didn't devalue it, now decided they will. So maybe it's the area you're in, maybe it's the type of publication you have, maybe you're doing informational blog content, they don't care that much, suddenly they do. I don't know the reasons, but they do. That does happen. So don't think, oh, it's been on my site forever, it couldn't have hurt me. Actually, yeah, it could.
Yeah.
Core update issues tend to be very large, very observable, and you can really see them. Not this hidden thing where you're trying to figure out what they did. Also, core updates tend to be technical. They don't have to be technical because there are ranking signals in the core that, like Panda, moved into the core. I don't know what they call it now. So it moved into the core and it's changed since then. But that applies to content. So it can be content, it can be technical, but it tends to be mostly technical because a lot of the core signals are based on technical issues. So, so you look for the large drop instant on the date or during the first week of usually it happens the first week, or like there's a second phase and then it happens like halfway through, but you'll see a cliff drop off of your traffic. And another way to tell you've been suppressed, because this is a suppression deal, right? So news sites, it's really obvious. Instead of having spikes, there's no more spikes. Everything is even keel. There's no big jumps. Also, the top of your traffic seems to be equal to the valleys of your last traffic. So if you look at your peaks and valleys like in GSC, you'll see that your tops kind of are close to what the drops were before. And you won't go back up above. If you go down and you come back up, probably was not related to the update itself, unless the update just corrected itself. So that's generally how you tell for a core update. And then also get auditors. I'm not promoting myself, but I mean just generally auditors, because we do this all the time. So we have a much better idea what you're looking at. I had 4 people come to me for audits. They were told they were hit by helpful content. I looked at the dates of the drops, and I looked at their sites. I'm like, you're definitely not hit by helpful content. You're hit by cores. And 3 of those right now are in recovery. I'm waiting for the 4th.
Where do you recommend people go to stay up to date on this and learn? Do they just go to Google and are there specific websites or YouTube channels you'd recommend that they follow to hear about the most recent update and to know what to do?
Oh, that's hard. I would say Google has written about it. Learn ranking systems. Go and read all of Google's documentation on how search works, the ranking systems, how those work. Roger Monti at Search Engine Journal does a really good job on breaking down stuff, because he actually makes sure that he's verified what he doesn't know with Google. And then Barry, of course, is always the best to know about when did it roll out, what did Google say. Barry Schwartz, sorry, yeah. Because Barry, he's written something like 45,000 articles in his lifetime. Oh my gosh, right? I don't go much outside of that. I go to people I know that do the work, that I trust and I know are successful. Because the problem is, we seem to have this thing in the industry right now is like, I got to publish right now. I've already seen like 10 how to recover from the current core update. I'm like, it hasn't even finished rolling out, right? So just going online and searching for stuff is probably not going to be the best way to do it. I do it by checking what Google's saying, seeing what John's saying, asking questions to John, Martin, or Gary. If you don't know who those are from Google, it's really easy to find out. John Mueller, Gary Ish, which is Illyes, and then Martin Split. Martin Split is the technical one, so if you have technical questions, he's the best one. But then also make sure you understand the ranking systems, anything new that they've published about this, check their pages. I go back and read their SEO 101 guide once a year, because they've changed things in there that I was not aware of. So, and then again, using Sitebulb and going through, and even if you get the free version or just read online, they say what everything does and how and why it's a factor, why it matters. So that's a really good way for you to tell where the issues are. But there's just not a lot of resources. I kind of miss the days though when we didn't have any information. because those
Yeah.
are new, don't realize there were days we had no Google documentation. Like somebody knew
Yep.
Matt Cutts and they were a black hatter
Mhm.
and Matt and them talked because they broke something that Matt was fixing and they were actually helping Matt, and then Matt would tell him a secret and then we learned something, right? Also the
Yeah.
best ways I'd say is go to conferences. Go to Brighton,
Yeah.
because when you can sit there and ask the speaker who was sitting there having drinks with you at the end of the day, or you can ask somebody
Mhm.
in a talk, like, what did this mean? And what did that mean? Oh, you do this? I don't do that. How do I learn that? Those are the best ways to
Yeah.
learn. I would learn more in a conference in 3 days than I ever would learn in a year on my own. So I think that's one of the best ways you can do. Yeah.
What do you think are like the most common misconceptions or mistakes that SEOs make when it comes to the algorithm? You already mentioned one. One is like the, EAT. Everyone focuses on EAT thinking it's going to make this like huge impact, and it actually doesn't. What are some other misconceptions that people come across when analyzing sites for algorithm updates?
One thing I just want to say on EAT is a good concept. So if you're trying to make sure your site is something people will trust, if you're a medical site and you use medical doctors, of course it's a medical site, but you don't need that on like a pizza site or, a hobby site.
Yeah.
Misconceptions. I would say really just not understanding algorithms anymore. Like people are so looking for this secret answer, the quick fix, the guidelines, or the leak, which isn't what people think it is, that they don't just go read the real documents, the real research papers from Google, the patents, right? And if you don't know how to read a patent, no problem. Roger Monti writes about a bunch of the patents in Search Engine Journal and breaks them down for you, right? It's not the same as having Bill Swasky, where you can ask questions to all the time, but at least you get like really good information about that patent. Patents aren't always in use, though. You have to make sure you don't assume it's in use. But I think people are just looking for, unfortunately, quick answers. And real SEO is kind of boring. I mean, it's not boring because it changes all the time. But the core principles that have been programmed into those algorithms 20 years ago, they may have changed, extrapolated, they may have added some, but they haven't gone away, right? Like CWVs are an offshoot of PageSpeed. PageSpeed was amazing, something everyone wrote off because it was a tiebreaker. It was a tiebreaker at the keyword level. So I had a site that got 250,000 visits overnight from the PageSpeed improved. Now CWVs don't work that way at all. Like, so you might get a little boost. But there's a devaluation factor in CWVs that you'd only know if you talk to people that do site auditing, because we see it. So that's why things like conferences are so important.
How do you see the future changing when it comes to Google and algorithm updates?
More machine learning. I think the HCU problem from November to March, April was a machine learning issue. I don't have proof of that. I want to just tell you it's my opinion. But when they got rid of Penguin and put it in the core, right? The last update lifted everyone that did any of the work, right? And then that went away, and then came core. The HCU went from site-wide to page-wide over March and April, right? But no sites recovered in March. And then April, no sites recovered. So normally if they're going to change it from site-wide to page level, they're going to lift all the sites off of the site-wide one, and they're going to go to the page level. So you might get a lift and then go down because they removed the site-wide, and then you get the page level. But nothing happened. And then they told people you might just want to walk away from your website. That was like an official Google statement. And then they said it might be 3 updates, and then it might be 2 updates. And now they're like, oh, this time we're sure some people will recover, right? And I looked at 50 sites that people submitted to me with detailed information. I didn't go in depth, but I looked at them in general. And a lot of them have similarities, small publishers, to spam sites because they use similar templates, they use similar styles. And I think the machine learning was not trained properly. And HCU was the first machine learning algorithm. And Matt Cutts always said he'd never put machine learning into the algorithms because if it breaks stuff, you don't know how to fix it. So I think stuff broke, and I think now they're trying to fix it.
Kristine, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on and chat with us today. I've learned a lot. You've said a lot of things that resonate with me, and a lot of things that I think I need to go back and analyze that a little bit more, go in a little bit more depth on that. So I appreciate you jumping on and talking with me today.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And to everyone else who's listening out there, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. Listen, I know how valuable an hour of your time can be, and for you to take that busy time out of your day and spend it with us, it really means a lot. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider liking and subscribing on whatever platform you're on. And don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us what you thought about the interview. Ask us questions. Let us know what other digital topics you'd like to hear about in the future. We're here to add value to your life and elevate your digital presence online. If you'd like some help doing that, reach out to me at fireusmarketing.com. See you on the next one.